With the Romulan mining ship Narada traveling through an anomaly to the past, an entirely new universe would be created, and this single incursion would have a major impact on that universe, with a paranoid Starfleet command launching several starship classes the likes of which no one had ever seen before. But what are these new starship classes and what do we know about them? Well, today we'll find out. Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon, a Star Trek web series that dives into the history of any given topic using beta canon sources and my own imagination to fill in the gaps. In today's episode, we're taking a look at the starship classes of the TMP era of the Kelvin Universe, to better understand their place in Star Trek history. Please note, this video is a mega mix of the original Kelvin Christmas event I did way back in 2023. You see, many of you good trinaries have asked for me to cut these videos together into one story, creating a single cogent narrative. And so, since soon I'll be diving back into this universe, I thought now would be the perfect time to do so. Also, most of these classes featured in this mega tale were designed and kit-bashed into reality by me, with a few of the following exceptions. The 3D model of the Constitution Class Mark II comes from Alex 3D, while the 3D model of the Proxima class comes from Captain Whitmere. So I'd like to thank them both here and now for their contributions to this video. As I've often said, other universes within Star Trek intrigue me, and the Kelvin Universe was no different, with me asking the question, what would happen to starship classes as well as the timeline itself after the successful launch of that universe's USS Enterprise? And so, I carefully worked out a storyline based on alpha and beta canon for you all to enjoy. But of course, and as always, because this is just a beta canon and fanfiction video, all information relayed should pretty much be taken with a grain of stardust and only considered a little bit of Star Trek fun. And so, with all that out of the way, let's begin. Relaunched in the 2380s, the Narada was essentially an out-of-date Romulan starship that had been experimented on utilizing captured Borg technology, which immediately enhanced the starship beyond both Romulan and Starfleet vessels of the time. And although essentially similar to that of the Prime Universe, the Kelvin Universe, as it would come to be known, would increasingly grow into a very different one than our own. Having highly detailed scans of the Narada, and even some components left over from the Narada encounter, Starfleet Command would begin to reverse engineer and create the Narada's technology out of absolute fear that others in the galaxy were doing the same or had access to that technology. As a result, many breakthroughs in technology would be made decades and even centuries before prime timeline Starfleet, such as a workable transwarp drive, something prime Starfleet had difficulty inventing until the latter part of the 24th century. These breakthroughs would lead to Starfleet Command redeveloping its starship designs, starting with the Constitution class. The original USS Constitution would be launched in 2245, just as her Prime Universe counterpart had been. However, even as she was being launched, Starfleet Command was making major breakthroughs into transwarp, leading Starfleet Command to cancel plans to launch any further ships of the class. Instead, Starfleet starship designers would be ordered to redesign the Constitution class to include this new technology, along with any other technological breakthroughs that Starfleet's best and brightest believed they had achieved. And although a long process, taking over a decade to complete, in 2258 the new Constitution class would be born. Retaining the Constitution class name, the first starship of this revamped class to actually be launched would be the USS Enterprise. Sitting at a length of 725 meters, in order to accommodate all the new and quite bulky technology, the Constitution class would be designed to be operated by 1,100 officers and crew members. Transwarp capable, the USS Enterprise would immediately become one of the fastest starships in the fleet, even though prototype transwarp drive systems had already been installed to several other starship designs in preparation for its inclusion within the Enterprise. where a trip from Earth to Vulcan would take over 27 days at standard safe cruising velocities, starships like the USS Enterprise, equipped with the new transwarp drive, could reach the planet in slightly over 5 minutes, a huge tactical advantage for Starfleet Command. The new Constitution class would include 6 dual phaser emitter banks and 4 photon torpedo launchers, all more powerful than its Prime Universe counterpart's tactical weaponry. She would also contain an oversized shuttle bay, fully stocked with a variety of auxiliary spacecraft. The USS Enterprise would end up performing above and beyond Starfleet's expectations, with the organization immediately ordering the construction of 12 other starships of the class. But having realized the importance of the Enterprise's technological breakthroughs, Starfleet Command would also launch several other classes in the same style and aesthetic as their new flagship, with the idea of upgrading and replacing its now seemingly old existing fleet. And with that declaration, the Kelvin Universe would take on a shape of its own, far removed from that of the Prime Universe. Sitting at a length of 484 meters, the Saladin-class destroyer would be designed to be operated by 560 officers and crew members. The Saladin-class would be the simplest design created by Starfleet Command. Launched in 2254, like many of Starfleet's newest starship classes, the Saladin-class's construction and development had actually began long before the Enterprise's completion and launch. The Saladin class would contain only one nacelle, no secondary hull, and no shuttle bay, though it would contain 2 shuttle pod launching bays located on the underside of the primary hull. The Saladin class would be the slowest of the new starship classes, taking almost double the time to reach Vulcan at its maximum transwarp speed. But this class would be far more powerful than any starship class existing in Starfleet's old Star Fleet. With a mission profile defined as a patrol and escort vessel, the Saladin class would often be assigned to patrol the borders of Starfleet's 2 greatest enemies, the Klingon Empire and the Romulan Star Empire. She would remain in service with various refits and upgrades until the early 24th century. Created along the same lines as the Saladin class, the Akula class would instead contain 2 overcharged warp nacelles within its design. Sitting at a length of 486 meters, the Akula class would be designed to be operated by only 480 officers and crew members. This was because of its mission profile as an emergency response type vessel class. Also armed to the teeth for its size, the Akula class would be almost as fast as the Enterprise herself, making her ideal for that type of mission profile. Often assigned to augment the border patrol fleet, should an emergency arise, the Akula class would spring into action, diverting all available power to its engine systems to reach its destination as fast as possible. And once there, it could engage an enemy vessel or evacuate a colony with relative ease. The Akula class would contain large open area cargo bays, which could be easily converted to medical, living, or weaponry holding facilities, depending on what a specific mission's requirements could be. Again, like the Saladin class, she would remain in service until the early 24th century, receiving various upgrades and refits during her lifetime. The 2240s and the 2250s was an age of technological explosion and innovation for Starfleet Command and the United Federation of Planets. The Saladin class and the Akula class were making news with every light year they traveled. However, this in itself would cause a tremendous problem in the long run, as both the Klingon Empire and the Romulan Star Empire would begin to take notice. The Klingon Empire had had many interactions with Starfleet during the mid to late 22nd century, but shortly before the turn of the century had closed off their borders and apparently decided to leave the Federation alone. But not all in Starfleet believed that to be true. And in fact, When the Narada USS Kelvin incident occurred, at first, Starfleet considered that this interaction might be a prelude to invasion by their once dormant foe. Of course it wasn't, but the Admiralty of Starfleet Command would make the decision to use that incident to their advantage, expanding their fleet for the protection of the Federation as a guise to cover up their real goal that they had, to create a fleet that could decimate anything the Klingon Empire could throw at it. And so Starfleet Command continued its starship creation and construction program by looking at previous starship designs that had served Starfleet well. And so now, Starfleet's best and brightest starship designers would focus their efforts on 2 starship designs of the past fleet, update them, and make them battle-ready should war with the Klingon Empire finally break out. The first refit design to make an appearance on the galactic stage would be the Cardenas-class refit. Also known as the Cardenas-class Mark II, this starship design would be approximately 537 meters in length and designed to be operated by 458 officers and crew members. The Cardenas-class refit would have a warp core very similar to that of the Constitution class, but would be a 4 nacelle design. In theory, the addition of 2 more nacelles would allow the Cardenas class to create a stronger, far more focused transwarp field, making her far faster than any other starship in the fleet, and this theory proved to be true. This would make Starfleet Command very happy, as now they could post many Cardenas-class vessels far outside the range of Klingon border sensor outposts, yet be only a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Empire, should an emergency situation arise. Tactically, the Cardenas-class refit would not be as well armed as the Constitution class, yet still very well armed for a vessel its size. Containing the newly created dual phaser bank emitters, which themselves could fire a steady phaser stream or far more powerful bursts of phaser energy, the Cardenas-class refit also contained both forward and aft photon torpedo launching systems. Far more paranoid than his Prime Universe counterpart, Admiral Marcus, the head of Starfleet Command, would use his personal resources to spy on the Klingon Empire. Hearing rumblings of a new Klingon stealth technology that could render a Klingon vessel completely invisible to Starfleet's current level of sensor technology, he would set the Daystrom Institute the task of developing countermeasures to this possible threat. And as a result, the Cardenas-class refit would contain 4 newly developed sensor arrays, which themselves were the most advanced and sensitive sensor arrays ever included in a starship designed by Starfleet Command. And when push came to shove, in 2256, the Cardenas-class refit would get its chance to test this new technology at the Battle of the Binary Stars. The Federation was large and growing almost daily, thanks to the technological explosion that Starfleet was experiencing. What Starfleet wanted was a well-armed vessel like the Constitution class, but one that was equipped for emergency response situations. And after months of debate and design, Starfleet Command was presented with an unusual starship class that Starfleet's best and brightest hope would fit the bill: the Ascender class. Sitting at a length of 402.8 meters, the Ascender class would be designed to be operated by 321 officers and crew members. In order to fit this class's mission profile as an emergency response type starship class, required an increase in the class's transwarp speed to above what the Constitution class had already been able to sustain. And so, the Ascender class designers would simply reconfigure the design of the Constitution class to have a smaller and tighter starship profile. Tactically, the Ascender class would be as well equipped as her Constitution class big sister, containing an impressive array of dual phaser emitter banks, as well as photon torpedo launchers. The Ascender class could definitely hold her own in battle, should an emergency situation require it. All Ascender-class vessels constructed would be assigned to starbases, outposts, and colony patrol duties in the farthest reaches of Federation space. But again, thanks to its transwarp drive, still meant that several starships of this class were able to reach an uninhabited binary star system 6 light-years from Gamma Hydra and participate in the Battle of the Binary Stars. Unlike the Prime Universe's Battle of the Binary Stars, this universe's battle would turn out very differently. Admiral Marcus's paranoia would pay off, with Starfleet Command being victorious over the Klingon forces, preventing war from breaking out. But the loss of one of Marcus's closest friends, Admiral Brett Anderson, would see Alexander Marcus spiral deeper into his own psyche and seek vengeance against the Klingon Empire, believing that a war with the Klingons was inevitable. Receiving a commendation and promotion to Admiral after the battle, Philippa Georgiou would go on to take up Anderson's former position of head of fleet operations, and would begin to grow ever more suspicious of Marcus with each passing day. Unfortunately, Admiral Georgiou would not have enough information or proof of Admiral Marcus's wrongdoing until 2259, when the Admiral would try to start a war with the Klingon Empire and try to destroy the Starship Enterprise using an unknown Starfleet starship named the USS Vengeance. Thanks to the Enterprise and her crew, however, again war would be averted and Admiral Marcus would be stopped. But the success of Starfleet at the Battle of the Binary Stars, and the reports from both Klingon and Romulan operatives of the USS Vengeance and its capabilities, would end up pushing both empires into attempts to improve their own technology and starship designs that would in the end have sadly devastating consequences for the Klingon Empire, with the destruction of the Klingon moon Praxis. Though successful, the Battle of Altamid had been devastating for the Federation flagship, the USS Enterprise. Ordered to the planet Altamid in 2263, the Enterprise would be destroyed shortly after its arrival, but ultimately, the crew of the USS Enterprise would be triumphant, returning to and saving Starbase Yorktown from its own destruction. Given the heroic status of her crew throughout the Federation, the decision would be quickly made to christen Starfleet's newest starship, being constructed at Starbase Yorktown, as the Enterprise A, and Captain James T. Kirk would once again command the great starship. The Enterprise A was a Mark II Constitution class. Sitting at a length of 737 meters, the Enterprise A was designed to be operated by only 800 officers and crew members. The technological explosion of the mid-23rd century had not ended with the launch of the original Constitution-class Enterprise. In fact, it had only just begun. Reverse engineering the Narada technology had been a tough job, and again, although successful, Starfleet Command's best and brightest were only now beginning to understand the technology fully. And with this understanding came new breakthroughs and development that would see said technology improved and decreased in size. The biggest and bulkiest technology of Starfleet's new Starfleet was of course the transwarp drive, but by 2262, Starfleet believed it was ready for a new generation of that drive, one which would be much faster and also much smaller. But there was one problem. Both Starfleet's engineering division and the Daystrom Institute had developed new transwarp drive systems, which in itself meant that 2 new classes were needed to test them. The first class, of course, was the Constitution Class Mark II. A sleeker design than the original, Starfleet hoped that lightning would strike twice with her, and it was somehow very fitting for the USS Enterprise to once again lead the charge with this transwarp breakthrough. Tactically, the Constitution-class Mark II would be as well equipped as the original. Dual phaser emitter banks as well as photon torpedo launchers, both forward and aft, would ensure the new Constitution class would pack a punch. But also, both these systems themselves had been upgraded tremendously, making the Enterprise A the strongest starship in the fleet. The Constitution-class Mark II would also improve on some inherent design flaws of the original. A thicker connecting dorsal or neck section was added, along with thicker nacelle pylons to ensure the starship's safety while in combat. Her shield systems would also be improved, granting an additional 30% power to that system. Launched in 2264, the USS Enterprise A would carry the hopes and dreams for the future of the Federation, and she would not disappoint. Being constructed at almost the exact same time as the Enterprise A, the USS Excelsior was to be dubbed the Great Experiment. A radically different transwarp drive system created by the Daystrom Institute, this starship class would focus on reinforcing the transwarp field using deflector strips placed throughout her hull. Sitting at a length of 854 meters, the Excelsior class was designed to be operated by 1,000 officers and crew members. The Excelsior class had much more of an angular profile, appearing more like the destroyed USS Vengeance rather than the sleeker Enterprise. Wanting it to have a bit of menace to it, Daystrom would base the design of the Excelsior class on the Vengeance, though changing aspects of it to make it appear a little less threatening. Tactically, the Excelsior class would be as well armed as the Constitution class Mark II, with the bulkier design of the class being able to handle a little more of a beating than the aforementioned new Constitution class. Also launched in 2264, the Excelsior class would perform above and beyond what anyone had expected, cementing this new design as a staple starship of the line for Starfleet, and not a moment too soon. Both the Klingon and Romulan Star Empires were using fury to mask their fear over the seemingly unstoppable power of the Federation. After losing the Battle of the Binary Stars, the Klingon Empire was in complete chaos, with the great houses of the Empire completely divided, which almost led to a civil war. Many houses were demanding retribution and revenge on the Federation, demanding that the Empire go to war immediately, regardless of how the Battle of the Binary Stars had proven them woefully unprepared for the Federation. Meanwhile, other houses demanded that the Empire improve its technology immediately, and then go to war. But after this battle, there was one thing that happened that no one in the Empire had expected: a growing admiration for the Federation and its strength. One house, the House of Gorkon, would even begin suggesting that perhaps the Empire should embrace the Federation and add their honor to their own, with a peace treaty that would see both sides grow in strength. Of course, the Klingon Empire and its Chancellor were not ready to seriously consider this option, at least not yet. The Klingon Chancellor would instead follow the safer plan of improving Klingon technology, before re-engaging the Federation. Infiltrating Starfleet in out-of-the-way places like the K-7 space station, the Empire would gain some knowledge of the Federation's new technology, but not enough. And although Klingon scientists were working around the clock to improve Klingon starship weaponry, the Empire was nowhere near ready to face the Federation. With the fear of executions hanging over their head, the Klingon scientists would end up pushing the mining teams on the Klingon moon Praxis to their limit, which in turn would have devastating consequences for the Empire. And in early 2265, while the Klingon Chancellor was inspecting new technological breakthroughs on Praxis, a chain reaction of explosions would destroy the moon, killing the Chancellor and all the best and brightest scientists of the Empire. And the moon's destruction would also contaminate the homeworld's atmosphere, which in turn would make Kronos uninhabitable within 50 Earth years. Not having the resources to combat this catastrophe, the Empire was left with only two choices. One, to go to war with the Federation and let the Empire die out in a blaze of glory, or two, to make peace with the Federation and let them help save the Empire as one house and one man wanted: Captain Gorkon of the House of Gorkon. Captain Gorkon's controversial position of making peace with the Federation had, up until this point, been generally ignored or outright laughed at. But the destruction of Praxis, mixed with the knowledge that when the devastating accident had happened, the USS Excelsior on her shakedown cruise under the temporary command of Hikaru Sulu had offered the Empire assistance, and that began to sway public opinion. Within a month, the Klingon people were demanding Gorkon be installed as the new Chancellor of the Empire, and that his peace initiative go forward for the good of the Empire. Meanwhile, like the Klingon Empire, the Romulan Star Empire had been watching the Federation grow, and the technological explosion the Federation was experiencing worried the Praetor greatly. This had forced the Star Empire to step up development of their own technology to a fevered pitch. And by 2265, the Romulan Empire had made one of its greatest breakthroughs, an invention that would become known as a cloaking device. To test this new technology, the Romulans built a new flagship, preparing it to be the first to include this revolutionary tech. Meanwhile, the calls for Captain Gorkon to be installed as a new High Chancellor infuriated the House of Duras. Unlike most of the great houses with their names being changed as their leaders died, the House of Duras had maintained that name, ensuring every generation had a Klingon named Duras to carry on the great legacy of that name into the future. Having connections within the Star Empire for centuries, though of course unofficially, the House of Duras once again turned to the Romulans for help with their Federation Peace Gorkon problem, and together they formulated a plan. Seeing an opportunity, the Star Empire would give the House of Duras their prototype cloaking device, which the House could use to derail the peace process. Originally, the Romulan plan had been to have their flagship secretly attack Federation outposts along the neutral zone border, to truly test the strength of the Federation. But now, this plan, which saw no real risk to the Romulans at all, seemed like a dream come true. In the prime timeline, the Romulan cloaking device would be far from perfect. Vessel shadows, able to be detected on sensor sweeps, along with having to decloak before firing, made the Romulan cloaking device a less than ideal advantage over the Federation. But, in the Kelvin Universe, the prototype Romulan cloaking device was very different. Impervious to sensor sweeps, with a low power usage, meant that a starship that was cloaked could fire torpedo weaponry while still maintaining its invisibility, which the House of Duras would utilize to its advantage. Equipping the cloaking device on one of their most powerful D4 birds of prey, the House of Duras would enact a plan so devious and so cunning that they believed it would have no chance of failure. Even as the new Federation flagship, the USS Enterprise A, met with Kronos 1, the House of Duras was lying in wait aboard their D4 bird of prey. Sitting at a length of a mere 25.5 meters, the D4 bird of prey was no slouch when it came to being powerful within its own right. Though the Klingon Empire had not made much advancement technological-wise, one thing they had perfected was the torpedo launching system for this type of bird of prey. Storing torpedo patterns, the D4 bird of prey would simply replicate torpedoes right in the launching chamber, where simultaneously a separate antimatter storage pod would deliver the right amount of antimatter directly into the torpedo, making the weapon ready to fire in less than 5 seconds. This would free up torpedo storage space within the D4, while at the same time making the D4 able to carry hundreds of torpedoes if necessary. The D4 bird of prey could be operated by up to 12 Klingon officers, or as little as 3 if the situation required it. Cramped and claustrophobic by Federation standards, for the House of Duras' plan, the D4 fit the bill quite nicely. Lying in wait, cloak active, the Duras bird of prey would fire 2 torpedoes at Kronos 1, making it appear that the Federation starship Enterprise had fired on the Chancellor's starship. Then, beaming over Klingon operatives from the starship Enterprise, these officers would be successful in killing Gorkon, making it appear that the Federation had organized the entire plot against the Empire, hoping to sway citizens of the Empire away from peace with the Federation. But what the House of Duras didn't count on was one of the allies of the House of Gorkon, specifically a young commander in the Klingon Imperial Fleet named Commander Chang. A loyal follower of Gorkon, and with the captain of Kronos 1 killed in the attack seemingly by the Enterprise, Commander Chang assumed command of that starship, and immediately was struck by several things that did not make much sense. Federation technology was far more advanced than the Empire, and if the Federation truly wanted Gorkon dead, the Enterprise could have easily destroyed Kronos 1. In fact, the Enterprise had surrendered to Chang almost immediately, with Captain Kirk and his Chief Medical Officer Dr. McCoy beaming to Kronos 1 in an attempt to save the Chancellor's life. Plus, how did the Starfleet officers that beamed over know exactly where Gorkon was aboard Kronos 1 to assassinate him? Chang wasn't a fool, and immediately felt the situation seemed far too perfect to be real, and so, instead of placing Captain Kirk under arrest and seizing the Enterprise, Chang would suggest an alliance with the Great Captain in order to piece together what had happened. But would this unlikely alliance succeed, or even hold? Or would the peace process be completely derailed and plunge the Empire and the Federation into an all-out war? The Duras-Romulan plot had been a complete success. Reports of the new Chancellor's death at the hands of the Klingon Empire's greatest enemy rang out like church bells across the Alpha and Beta quadrants. Even Starfleet's most heroic and iconic captain, James D. Kirk, was in the hands of the Klingon Empire. Everything was going according to plan. Or was it? Almost immediately after reporting the Chancellor's death, Kronos 1 had gone silent, ignoring orders to return to the home world with the captured criminals. The uncertainty was way too much for the Romulan Praetor, and so he decided to send their newest flagship to the area to investigate. Meanwhile, the USS Enterprise and the IKS Kronos 1 began to investigate into the events that had led up to the Chancellor's death. Kronos 1 was a Katinga-class battlecruiser, one of only a handful to exist in the Empire at the time. Sitting at a length of 349.54 meters, the Katinga-class battlecruiser was designed to be operated by 550 loyal and honorable Klingon officers. The basic profile of the Katinga-class battlecruiser had been in service for hundreds of years, receiving changes and upgrades as the years rolled by. But even though appearing similar to older designs, the Katinga class was nothing of the sort. In response to the technological explosion the United Federation of Planets seemed to be having in the mid-23rd century, the Klingon Empire had diverted much of its resources into an attempt to match the Federation's technological breakthroughs. Unfortunately, the Empire would fall short, though that didn't mean they hadn't made some progress towards their goal. Not capable of transwarp velocity, the Katinga-class battlecruiser would have a standard safe cruising speed of warp factor 7, with an emergency maximum speed of warp factor 9.1 for 16-hour increments. Tactically, the Katinga class would be the most well-armed vessel class of the Empire, containing disruptor bank emitters as well as cannons and both forward and aft torpedo launching systems. Shielding for the class would be much weaker than its Federation counterparts, but this inherent weakness would be overcome by the class's armor plating, which itself could absorb a lot of weapons fire. At the time of the Praxis incident, very little was known about this new starship class from the Empire, but something about the Katinga-class battlecruiser would strike fear throughout the Federation, and with the Empire seemingly calling for peace, the chance to gather intel on this design was too hard to ignore. And so the Federation Council set up a meeting between the Enterprise and Kronos 1 where the flagship of the Federation would escort the flagship of the Empire directly to Earth, where the peace process would begin, or at least, that had been what the Federation hoped. With the USS Enterprise also ignoring communications from Starfleet Command, the two crews began their investigation into the Chancellor's death. Scouring both ships for clues, the assassins would eventually be found, and during a mind meld with the Enterprise's first officer, Commander Spock, the entire Duras Romulan plot would be revealed. Meanwhile, the flagship of the Romulan Star Empire watched as the USS Enterprise and the IKS Kronos 1 seemingly were working together to unravel all the hard work of the Star Empire and the House of Duras. Receiving word that the peace conference was once again on, the Romulan flagship would immediately decide to head for the Khitomer outpost to ensure the success of their mission. Also discovering that the peace process was on again, the USS Enterprise would contact the USS Excelsior and receive the location of the peace conference and request the Excelsior's help with tracking down and eliminating this seemingly invisible foe. Towing Kronos 1 at transwarp to Khitomer, the two starships would enter the system side by side, not knowing what to expect. Almost immediately, both starships came under attack by the cloaked D4 bird of prey. Both starships attempted to mount a defense against their foe, all to no avail. The D4 bird of prey was simply too fast and maneuverable for either starship to triangulate its position in time to return fire. Both ships were taking a beating when the USS Excelsior arrived on scene and began to triangulate the D4's position using its more advanced computer systems. Not wanting their mission to fail, it was at this time that the Romulan flagship would join in on the assault of the three starships, with its focus being the USS Excelsior. Contacting the Enterprise and the Excelsior, Commander Chang asked if it was possible for the two Starfleet vessels to somehow modify their torpedoes to detect ionized plasma, reasoning that both the enemy starships would be expending a great amount of impulse fuel to stay one step ahead of their prey. Captain Kirk of the Enterprise and temporary Captain Sulu of the Excelsior both loved the plan and immediately got to work on modifying the torpedoes while all three starships continued to take a beating. But once ready, both starships would fire their torpedoes in the direction that they believed their enemy to be and would hold their breath, waiting to see what would happen. Both torpedoes would find their targets. And in short order, all three starships would bear down on their enemy targets, destroying both in a blaze of glory that would light up Khitomer. Landing parties from all three vessels would beam down into the conference and save the Federation president from assassination, and the peace process would continue forward with the story of how these once great foes had worked together side by side to save the peace conference and the Klingon Empire as a whole, and songs of the great battle would be sung throughout the Empire. As for the House of Duras, it would be dismantled, with all remaining house members either being executed for treason or being sent into dishonorable exile at the fringes of Klingon space. Over the next few years, the Federation and Klingon Empire would build upon the peace process, and although at times strained, the process would hold, and eventually the Khitomer Accords would be signed, much to the dismay of the Romulan Star Empire. Having their greatest starship ever created defeated at Khitomer, the Romulan Star Empire would begin to make preparations for the downfall of both of their enemies. But the Romulan Star Empire would never get a chance to put their plans into action, as an event from the past, the Narada's arrival and creation of this universe, would come back to haunt the Empire, when an unknown enemy would show up in Romulan space searching for what they believed to be their missing starship.
Resistance is futile.
By early 2266, the peace process between the United Federation of Planets and the Klingon Empire was in full swing. Thanks to the Battle of Khitomer, almost overnight, both sides had gained a new appreciation for one another, a situation the Romulan Star Empire could not tolerate. After their involvement in the plot to assassinate the Klingon High Chancellor had been revealed, the Star Empire had withdrawn all their starships back into their home space, closing their borders to all outsiders. Both the Federation and Klingon Empire were appalled by the Star Empire's behavior, demanding an explanation for the entire situation, lodging formal protests, and even threatening all-out war. Of course, the Star Empire knew it had time on its hands. Thanks to the evacuation of Kronos, the Klingon homeworld, neither the Federation or the Klingon Empire could really afford a war, at least not at present. And so demands from both their enemy governments would be ignored. Instead, the Romulan Star Empire would divert all of its resources into building a massive fleet that, when the Star Empire was ready, would destroy both the Klingon and Federation fleets. Bold plans and strategies were debated in secret within the Romulan Senate, while the Federation and Klingon Empire proceeded with the evacuation plan of Kronos. The Federation, for its part, was keeping its eyes on the Star Empire, and was well aware of the Romulan starship construction program, as well as the war planning taking place behind closed doors. And in response, Starfleet Command began its own secret starship construction program that even the Federation Council would not be informed of. Working directly with the Chancellor of the Klingon High Council, Starfleet Command would quickly set up a starship construction facility in one of the most remote Klingon sectors near the border of the Gamma Quadrant, under the direction of a secret organization in the Federation known as Section 31. This new shipyard would be charged not only with building a fleet of the most advanced starships ever created, but also to adapt the Federation's transwarp drive to function for Klingon starships, a fair trade for use of the Klingon sector. And one of the first starship designs to be created by the secret shipyards was the Toronado class. Sitting at a length of 366 meters, the Toronado class was designed to be operated by 220 officers and crew members. The Toronado class would have a standard safe cruising speed of warp factor 7, with an emergency maximum speed of warp factor 9.6 for 12-hour increments. Thanks to their deal with the Klingon High Chancellor, the transwarp drive had undergone a complete overhaul, making the transwarp core and its related systems not only far smaller than previous iterations, but also more powerful. From the fleet's position at the shipyard, it could reach the Romulan homeworld in less than 24 hours, making the Toronado class, at least for a time, the fastest Starfleet starship ever created. Tactically, the Toronado class was armed to the teeth, containing supercharged dual phaser emitter banks, as well as both forward and aft torpedo launching systems. Due to the Earth-Romulan Peace Treaty of 2160, several fleet restrictions had been imposed on both sides, and not wanting to reveal their clandestine operations within the Star Empire, the Federation could not call out the Star Empire about its fleet construction program. But also, thanks to Section 31 overseeing Starfleet's new construction program, meant that even if the Star Empire found out about it, the Federation Council and Starfleet Command had complete and plausible deniability. Shielding for the Toronado class would be almost twice as strong as her sister starships within the fleet. The Toronado class would perform above and beyond everyone's expectations on its shakedown cruise, just beyond the Gamma Quadrant's border, and as a result, the commander of Starfleet would order Section 31 to immediately put the class into full production, as the announcement of the Federation giving transwarp technology to the Klingon Empire was being broadcast throughout the Alpha and Beta quadrants. For the Romulan Star Empire, this gift of transwarp technology was the final straw, infuriating the Praetor so much that he ordered his War Council to begin preparations for an immediate attack on the Federation and Klingon Empire. The Romulan War Council, however, knew that they were nowhere near ready for such an endeavor, and were able to convince the Praetor that further preparations were necessary to ensure victory. And so, the Praetor granted his War Council an additional 18 months to prepare, and by early 2271, the Star Empire was ready and loaded for bear. But the Praetor's new fleet would not get a chance to strike at either the Federation or the Klingon Empire, as shortly before its launch, an ominous call would ring out through the Star Empire. Accompanied by a single Borg cube, the vessel, which would become known throughout the galaxy as V'ger, would enter Romulan space. And seemingly unstoppable in its quest towards the Romulan homeworld, V'ger would lay waste to all colonies and Romulan ships standing in its path, all the while calling out, "Narada, Narada, Narada." V'ger was alone. It did not know how long its journey had been, or how long it had felt alone. It simply was. After falling accidentally into an unmapped and unknown transwarp conduit, Voyager 6 would emerge broken and battered in the Delta Quadrant, specifically within Borg space. Fascinated by this alien technology, and wanting to use it for their own means, the Borg Collective would build the biggest, most complex vessel ever to house the Voyager probe, and then send it back on its mission. What they couldn't have known, what no one could have known, was that the very complexity of the Borg starship itself would lead V'ger to become sentient. On a leisurely pace back through the galaxy, searching for a way back to its homeworld, V'ger would amass so much collected data that it would spark the sentience the probe would become known for. So on V'ger would travel, collecting bits of data on its surroundings, all in an effort to find its creator's homeworld. V'ger was, as always, very much alone. Sitting at a length of approximately 78,000 meters, V'ger would not be designed to require any crew members for its operation. Instead, V'ger's central computer, hooked into the computer banks of the Voyager 6 probe, would control every aspect of the vessel's function. V'ger was capable of both transwarp and warp speeds. In fact, on its eventual approach to the Romulan homeworld, it would reach and maintain speeds of warp factor 12, all old warp scale of course. V'ger would not use its transwarp capabilities very often, as the vessel had an innate desire to record every piece of data it could. Thus, the vessel would always be traveling at lower warp velocities, ignoring the transwarp drive. Tactically, V'ger had originally been equipped with weaponry systems similar to that of plasma torpedoes. However, during its long voyage, it had adapted these weapon systems to not only destroy a target, but at the same time to record every minute detail about said target, and place that data into its memory banks. V'ger did not have shields in a conventional sense. Instead, V'ger could generate a massive energy field around its vessel, protecting the starship, while its specially reconfigured deflector emitters could capture or destroy any alien weaponry thrown at her. And although V'ger was indeed sentient, it should be noted that it did not truly comprehend humanoid life forms. Sure, it knew of their existence, having encountered alien race after alien race during its travels, but to V'ger, these humanoids would be no more understood than how a human understands a mosquito. At some point, through galactic mapping, V'ger learned the location of Earth, but before it reached the border of the Alpha Quadrant, a familiar voice would once again ring throughout its computer banks. The Borg had reunited with V'ger. Originally, the Narada was a simple Romulan mining vessel, but after the destruction of Romulus, the Romulan homeworld, its commander Nero installed an untried technology into the Narada systems. This technology had been derived from captured Borg technology that the Star Empire hoped would make them invincible. As a result, the Narada would grow and change significantly over time, using collected resources to reform itself into the most powerful Romulan vessel ever created. But during his quest for vengeance against who he saw as responsible for the destruction of the Romulan homeworld, Ambassador Spock and the Federation, the Narada would fall into an artificially created black hole, ending up in the year 2233 and creating an entirely new timeline in the process. The black hole, however, would also have another effect on the Narada, activating an unknown device which transmitted a limited and fragmented data signal to the Borg Collective. Out of this data, the Collective found only a few points of interest. First, that the developed technology was far more advanced than what the Borg currently had, and second, that the vessel's homeworld was a place called Romulus, with a set of coordinates for that system. The Borg Collective was powerful enough, but in order to ensure that they could capture the Narada without incident, they needed something which could overpower this vessel. And as if by magic, a scout vessel on the edge of the Delta to Alpha Quadrant borders detected V'ger, which brought up long pushed aside data in the Collective's memory. The scout vessel would be ordered to return home, while a single Borg cube would be sent to intercept V'ger and order its assistance with the Narada issue, using old, deeply buried Borg codes. Neither the Borg Collective or V'ger knew, however, that their quest was in vain, as the Narada had been destroyed by Captain James T. Kirk and the crew of the USS Enterprise back in 2258. On its journey to Romulus, the Romulan Star Empire would put up a valiant fight against V'ger, but even their Praetor's new battle fleet was no match for these enemies, with V'ger destroying the entire fleet of 127 battleships in less than 8 hours. And after a short coup on Romulus itself, the Federation would receive a distress call from the doomed planet, including the details of V'ger and the Borg Cube. For once, the Federation Council and Starfleet Command didn't delay in their response. Recognizing the enormous threat that these vessels posed, the Federation agreed to aid the Empire, with Commander Starfleet ordering Section 31 to deploy its new fleet to the Romulan homeworld. Meanwhile, aboard the Enterprise A, deep in Klingon space, having just delivered several ambassadors to more peace conference negotiations, First Officer Spock would begin to telepathically receive a distress call from V'ger itself. Spock did not understand the situation. All he knew was that V'ger was calling to him, and that he must convince Captain Kirk to intercept the vessel before it was too late. Even as V'ger and the Borg Cube continued their journey towards the Romulan homeworld after destroying the Romulan fleet, Starfleet Command was already in action. Sending orders to their secret starship construction facility hidden in Klingon space, Commander Starfleet Philippa Georgiou ordered Section 31 to send all of its newly constructed Starfleet vessels to intercept the seemingly impossible to stop enemies at Romulus itself. Meanwhile, also in Klingon space, the Enterprise A under the command of Captain James T. Kirk had been ordered to maintain their position and await further orders. However, bursting onto the bridge in an emotional state Kirk had rarely seen in his first officer, Commander Spock would inform the captain that they had to intercept V'ger before it was too late. And although puzzled, wanting more information, the captain would order a course set to intercept V'ger at the Enterprise's maximum speed. At the Klingon homeworld, Captain Hikaru Sulu, now permanent commander of the starship Excelsior, also reviewed the data on both V'ger and the Borg, immediately requesting an audience with the Chancellor of the Klingon High Council. Captain Sulu knew how high the stakes were, not only for Romulus, but for the galaxy as a whole. And in the same vein as his old friend James T. Kirk, he had decided to do something about it to try and even the odds. A huge gamble, but one that in the end could make all the difference. Sitting at a length of approximately 1,005 meters, the Proxima class would be designed to be operated by 820 officers and crew members, with space for an additional 1,000 officers should a mission require them. With all systems being top of the line, the Proxima class would be both warp and transwarp capable, with its transwarp drive systems being among the most advanced and fastest in current operation throughout the galaxy. Tactically, the Proxima class would be armed to the teeth, containing both dual phaser emitter banks capable of firing overcharged phaser beams, as well as torpedo launching systems both forward and aft, stocked with a new, more powerful version of the Starfleet Photon torpedo. Shielding for the Proxima class would be almost double in strength to those classes that had come out before her. Even the Constitution Mark II class paled in comparison to this class's shield output. The Proxima class had been designed to serve as a fleet carrier vessel during times of war, but because of its early launch to protect the Romulan homeworld, Starfleet's newest version of their fighter craft had yet to be delivered to these ships, and thus, the Proxima class would only contain a limited supply of auxiliary spacecraft aboard her. Only 14 Proxima-class starships would be operational enough to participate in what would become known as the Battle for Romulus. But if any starship class could truly make a difference in this battle, everyone believed it would be the Proxima class. With just over an hour left on the clock before V'ger and its Borg chaperone would reach Romulus, the Starship Enterprise would intercept the two vessels. Held in place by V'ger itself, the crew of the Starship Enterprise would attempt to communicate with the giant vessel. With Commander Spock's discovery that V'ger was transmitting an old-style radio signal, the Enterprise was finally able to make contact with V'ger itself capturing their new navigations officer, Lieutenant Ilia, much to the horror of her husband, the helmsman, Lieutenant Commander Will Decker. Shortly after, V'ger would send a probe to the Enterprise, in the form of Lieutenant Ilia. Even as Commander Spock, in an unbelievable display of illogic and emotion, would attempt to make contact with V'ger directly, via a spacewalk into the vessel's interior. And as the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, V'ger would arrive in the Romulus sector. As the battle began to rage around them, the Enterprise crew would begin to piece the puzzle of V'ger together, thanks to Spock. The contradictory nature within its programming had driven V'ger to seek its creator, to understand not only the universe, but its very existence. And so, in a gamble to save Romulus, Captain Kirk made the declaration to V'ger that they were the creator. And V'ger in return would pull the Enterprise deep inside itself to allow the creator to talk directly with V'ger. Though still mostly intact, the Federation fleet was still losing the battle against V'ger and the Borg Cube, unable to slow their advance towards Romulus. Kirk and his crew needed to buy time, however, in order to put the final pieces of the puzzle in place. And suddenly, as if by divine intervention, a fleet of Klingon battlecruisers would arrive in the sector led by Captain Sulu of the USS Excelsior. Hopefully, this new distraction would give Kirk and the Enterprise crew the time that they needed. With an oxygen atmosphere appearing around the Enterprise, Kirk would lead an away team of Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Decker to the heart of V'ger, where they would discover that V'ger was actually Voyager 6, an old Earth probe sent out by humanity centuries earlier. And after failing to trigger its data transmission protocols, Lieutenant Commander Decker would make the decision to join with V'ger and his wife and head out into the great unknown. Even as Kirk, Spock, and McCoy rushed back to the Enterprise, a blinding light would fill the Romulan sector, and when the dust had settled, V'ger would be gone. And V'ger's departure would have a few added bonuses. V'ger, having its own free will, disabled and shut down the Borg Cube, leaving it dead in space, unable to reconnect to the hive mind of the collective. As the Federation, Klingon, and what remained of the Romulan fleet hung in space over Romulus, the entire galaxy seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Together, these three galactic powers had managed to save the Alpha and Beta quadrants from assured destruction and subjugation. Even as celebrations erupted everywhere, and even as the new Free Romulan Republic established itself as a governing body, the Romulans would be invited to join the peace talks between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. But it wasn't simply a case of gratitude that would pull these sides together in the Kelvin Universe. It was the knowledge that the Borg would be back, and this would be the driving force to glue these galactic powers together. And as for V'ger, though scientists, theologians, and even the general public would theorize as to what had become of the Voyager 6 probe, no one really knew for sure. But one thing that they all agreed on was that V'ger was no longer alone.
Dispatch a subspace message to Admiral Hansen. We have engaged the Borg.
Thank you for watching today's very special episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon. What do you think of these Kelvin Universe starship classes and the historical narrative that I've created here? Do you want to see more videos like this one? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. When we next return to the Kelvin Universe, I'll be continuing this butterfly effect tale with a look at the TNG era of Trek, so I hope to see you then. Want to help the channel push for technological breakthroughs to redefine this universe? Then consider becoming a channel member subscriber or a channel patron, both a major help that allows this channel to purchase resources and 3D models to keep it going. The link to both memberships is in the description below. Thanks again for watching, live long, and prosper.